Well, hello and welcome to Decide, an introduction to framing for deliberation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kristen Bronner. I'm the Executive Director of the National Issues Forums Institute. Today, during our workshop, we'll explore how to frame public issues so that people can talk, decide, and act better together. Framing clarifies what's at stake, surfaces values and tension, and defines practical choices that allow communities to weigh trade-offs and find common ground for taking action. All right, a quick overview of what we'll be doing during today's agenda. During today's workshop, we'll define deliberative framing and why it matters, walk through promising practices for developing deliberative frameworks or discussion guides, look at examples and resources, and learn from one another. The presentation will be recorded. We'll share the slides, recording, and any resources in a follow-up email early next week. We encourage you to ask questions in the chat throughout the webinar. We'll have a dedicated time to answer them at the end, but we will try to address some throughout the presentation as well. So thank you so much for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started. And as we get started, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and let us know where you're joining from. So before we dive in, a quick word about who we are at the National Issues Forums Institute. At NIFI, we believe public problems cannot be solved without public participation. For over 40 years, we've worked to equip, empower, and mobilize people to use deliberation to take action for the public good. Our work is guided by three commitments: equipping citizens, communities, and campuses with tools for public decision making and deliberation, empowering people with skills and confidence to engage in deliberation, and mobilizing networks of practitioners and scholars to strengthen civic life and our democracy. So, what are national issues forums? Thought it'd be helpful to tell you a little bit more about them before we dive in. National issues forums, or deliberative forums that use the NIF model, are locally convened, nonpartisan, multi-perspective discussions on issues that affect our communities and the nation. They're generally led by volunteer moderators who help groups weigh choices, consider trade-offs, and identify shared directions for action. The National Issues Forums Institute produces nonpartisan discussion guides on national issues, but we also work with individuals and organizations to equip them to frame local and regional issues for deliberation. And that's the focus of our workshop today. So, what is deliberation and why should we do it? Deliberation is more than a discussion or conversation. It's talking with one another, not at one another, about what we should do together. The primary question at the heart of deliberation is, what should we do? Deliberation centers focus on the problem at hand rather than on a party, platform, or personalities surrounding the issue. When we deliberate, we weigh approaches and possible solutions, explore tensions, examine trade-offs, and look for common ground for decision making and action. One helpful tool for exploring possible solutions, tensions, and trade-offs are deliberative issue guides like the ones that are available at nifi.org. You don't need an issue guide to deliberate, but they are helpful. And so we'll be talking a lot more about how to frame deliberative discussion guides today. Deliberation is a key civic skill, but is not a silver bullet solution. It's also not the only form of civil discourse necessary to a thriving civic life. When done well, we also need good debate that can help us choose among candidates, party platforms, and elevate better arguments for why we should do something. We also need dialogue, which helps us bridge divides and increase understanding. Deliberation is most useful when people face complex, values-based, or shared public issues, situations where there's no simple right answer or technical solution, and where decisions require balancing competing priorities, interests, or moral considerations. We'll talk more about that in a bit later in the workshop. Today, we're going to dive deeper with the concept of framing issues for deliberation. Next slide, please. Deliberative issue framing is rooted in the belief that democracy depends on making choices together about how to deal with public problems. A deliberative framing isn't a policy paper, it's a decision-making tool. It reveals multiple valid ways to see the problem and the values and tension beneath those ways of looking at the problem. It requires curiosity and compassion so communities can move forward together. Now let's dive into some of the specifics of a deliberative framing. What does a good deliberative framework do? It supports productive, comprehensive ways of talking together. It can broaden understanding of an issue and its effects. It can help us examine a range of ways to address the problem or approaches or options. It also encourages us to weigh trade-offs of differing approaches, and it can contribute to informed individual and group actions. Before we dive into the specifics of how to frame a deliberative discussion guide, let's talk about why frame for deliberation. I'd like to turn to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Martine Carcassonne, to help us answer that question. Dr. Carcassonne is a professor in the Communication Studies Department at Colorado State University and the founder and director of the Center for Public Deliberation at CSU. His work focuses on building local capacity for deliberation and collaborative problem solving on difficult public issues. He is a nationally respected scholar and practitioner in deliberative democracy whose insights have shaped how communities frame and address complex challenges. And his insights have really framed how I think about deliberative framing as well. We're honored to have him with us today to share how framing can help people work together for the public good. Welcome, Martine, and thank you so much for taking time to be with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen. Always wonderful to get people together to talk about this work. Right? And share my screen and then go just kick yours out, right? Or yeah. So as Kristen said, my name is Martine Carkson. I've been doing this work for 20 years. Patty Deneen doesn't have her name on there. The National Issues Forum Institute actually trained me in the NIF model way back when I started with this, and NIF continues to be the base of the work of the CBD. If you don't know about the CBD, we train students as facilitators. We've run over probably about 600 meetings now in the last 20 years in Northern Colorado, helping us kind of come together to address shared issues more productively. So I'm going to just cover a few slides from a bigger presentation, and I'll give you all access. I'll create a Google Doc and share it towards the end that will have these slides and then other stuff from me. I'll talk about a couple things here that I'll talk very briefly, particularly the social psychology and brain science. But I'll provide, so, if you want to dig into that more or listen to me talk a little bit more slowly, I'll give you access to all that. And you'll find, as Kristen has found, it's never hard getting me talking about these things. So I'm happy to kind of dig more into it, right? And feel free to. I use LinkedIn to kind of brainstorm and share lots of things. I'm the only Martine Carkson in the world, so pretty easy to find me if you're on there. Um, but to kind of set this up a little bit, my work is really informed now by social psychology and brain science and kind of how we're wired. I do a lot of work on why are we polarized and how do we kind of take these challenges on and how do we get democracy to work better. So this is one way I'm framing broadly what I'm trying to do is how do we build capacity in our local communities for processes that avoid activating the worst of human nature. And the unfortunate reality is most of our processes do that right now, particularly a two-party national system, but our media system, our tech systems all kind of tend to bring out the worst in us and actually tap into the best of us. We need the creativity. We need, a lot of good stuff about human nature is so critical for a pluralistic, diverse democracy to work. It's just unfortunate how rarely our processes actually are able to tap into that, right? So again, this is about an hour-long presentation. I'm going to give you the 30-second version of it just to set up why I think discussion guides are so important, right? So when I talk about avoid triggering the worst of human nature and tap into the best, this is kind of what I'm talking about. So this is the negative stuff. This is the stuff that makes it so hard for us to talk about tough issues and to engage kind of the inherent complexities and the wickedness of problems. I'm not going to get into wicked problems today, but that's a big part of my framework that I'll show some videos. But since problems are inherently involve multiple underlying values that don't fit together very well, and then different people are going to prioritize those values differently, we have to have some really tough conversations for democracy to work. And the reality is our conversations are not wired. I mean, our brains are not wired for the kind of conversations that we need to have. So we need help. And certainly deliberative practice overall, and as I'll get into discussion guides, are key tools to help avoid this stuff, right? And actually get in. Oh, I think I got some. Get into the good stuff. I'll show you. The easy way to think about this is I've been playing with this concept of our brains are wired for what I call catty corner thinking or either or thinking. We're really good at really finding all the reasons we're right and all the reasons they're wrong. And we tend to have an us them framing, especially in a two-party system, or just a yes no framing, and that creates a lot of unfortunate kind of polarization, a lot of misconceptions, because the other side does the opposite, and we just talk past each other, right? So a lot of our work is how do we improve this? How do we help people recognize the downside of their perspective and recognize that the people they disagree with probably have some reasonable things that they're kind of hoping for? How do we get beyond these structures? Again, a two-party system encourages this kind of thinking rather than works to kind of get beyond it, right? Um, so these are the good stuff. This is what we know humans can do, and there's a lot of optimism to this. It's just much harder to get at this. The negative aspects of human nature are more evolved. They're easier to trigger, and you have conflict profiteers that are getting rich triggering them, right? But this is the hope that we have, that when we have good process, we avoid that stuff and we get to this stuff, right? And that's kind of the heart of my work and a book I'm working on right now. So all that sets up to, okay, how do we talk? Why is deliberation such a key tool? And I've been doing deliberative work for 20 years. I've been using discussion guides and seeing the value and how they help have conversations for 20 years. But it really wasn't until I started doing this deep dive about a decade ago into psychology and brain science that I was like, oh, this is why they work so well, right? So this slide, again, I'm going to do this quick. I've got other videos to dig into this. These are kind of the key components for deliberative engagement for me. Like, how are we framing the issue, bringing together small groups, having processes are designed not just for input, but for interaction, having facilitators at the table. But you see that second point is the heart of our discussion today, is the power of the discussion guide, right? Serving as a base of information that helps us deal with, information overload. The discussion guide becomes part of the CBD being seen as a honest broker of information, but it's also, critically something to react to, right? And you'll see as we'll get into the next slide, which is the main slide for my presentation, of why these discussion guides help us have these conversations that aren't natural to us, right? So I'm going to get to these kind of 5 points. So one is, as we heard a little bit already from Kristen, it gives us a range of perspectives to react to, right? Like one aspect, I love small group discussions because that lowers the bar and makes it easier, and you're not handing the microphone to the people that want to speak in front of 200 people because they often kind of have pretty, they want to speak because they're so sure they're right, right? They see things through kind of narrow lens. The problem is a small group, by definition, can't be diverse, right? You might have a diverse room, but it's really hard to have diversity in a group of 5 or 7 or 8 or whatever. We like small groups, and it's sometimes in AF forums are bigger. So the discussion guide brings that diversity of perspective, right? And it makes it a lot easier for the facilitator to bring lots of different voices in, even if they're stuck with a kind of a group that kind of thinks the same. So there's a power in that to really kind of broaden it. And you're not relying on the people that show up for the perspectives because you're bringing the perspectives that obviously you've engaged those people to create. Critical aspect of human nature is the discussion guide gives them a task to work on together. So much of my work is to switch from lighting up the adversarial parts of our brains to get to the collaborative parts of our brain, right? And when you tell people you do this discussion guide, the way I do it is like, this is designed, a document designed to help us have a better conversation, not just inform you, certainly not to persuade you, but to help us. There's an art to that. And then we ask them, we tell them, we didn't get it right. We didn't get it perfect. We try to capture the complexity. We try to capture your voices. But the purpose of this meeting is to react to this document, to help us refine and improve this document. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what's missing. But by doing that, instead of people being there to win an argument, to convince people I've got the right way of thinking, we're asking them to tap into that collaborative, creative part of their brain. How do we work together to improve this document? When people see each other as collaborators working on a problem versus opponents trying to win or lose, we think better, right? And that's what a discussion guide does. It helps us, most people avoid conflict. Some people love conflict and often talk too much. And there's a very small percentage of people that can deal with conflict well. These discussion guides are designed to grow that third group, right? It makes it easier for people to disagree. If I'm in a group of having conversations, someone expresses a strong opinion and I disagree with, it might be pretty hard for me to say, I think you're wrong, right? Because, ooh, that kind of, that's tough, right? But for someone to say, ooh, I really like this second bullet point on this discussion guide, and me say, I don't because it's a lot easier, right? So you're not just reacting to people's opinions, you're reacting to the discussion guide, which includes people's opinions and was created from that, right? But it allows us to deal with conflict in a way that's much more aligned with how our brains work, right? And then it helps us get away from that either or catty corner thinking. It's laying out the different options. It's laying out, basically instead of the either or, most NIF are three approaches. So you're getting multiple approaches. You're getting away from Democrat and Republican. You're getting away from yes, no, and so forth. Here are three different options. As Kristen said, none of these are a magic bullet. None of these are perfect. They all have inherent trade-offs, but it sets us up for have this much deeper conversation that we get away from what our brain wants, which is magic bullets or devil figures that solve all these problems, to do the hard work. And by not taking one issue at a time, So much we do with cities and school districts. It's, here's one solution at a time to a complex issue. And what happens with that is, first, it taps into negativity bias, which is one of the biases we have. You're much more likely for the people that are against it to show up, right? So the conversation is primarily negative, primarily criticism, and then either we decide to do it and everyone's mad, or we decide not to do it, but the problem never went away. But with NIF, providing kind of three broad approaches helps us realize that there is no magic bullet, right? So our job isn't to wait, to attack a bad idea or wait for the perfect idea, but is to how do we have the tough conversation to figure out, to get the best possible idea, right? The idea that has the best kind of mix in a sense. And often, as I think we'll be talking about, these approaches aren't choices. It's not like we're picking one. The choices are just, the approaches are designed to ensure a full conversation, to undo the blinders we have, to help us see the upside and downside opposite. And often when we move to reflections at the end part of an IF, you might pick and choose from different actions across these things. You might come up with new actions, right? So much of the process is to kind of undo the simple frames that we have kind of beforehand, right? Um, One of the most important aspects of human nature is we need to tap into human creativity. Right? We don't need creativity when we're blaming the other side or we're just kind of, have a magic bullet. But the recognizing the complexity of issues through these frameworks then helps trigger us as like, how do we work this problem better, right? How do we work together to address this? And then it also inherently does that with a broad range of actors. We're not assuming government is the only solution or individuals should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. We have the richness of, what's the role of government at different levels? What's the role of nonprofits? What's the role of private industries? What's the role of new organizations we can create, right? So it inherently kind of sparks how do communities come together to address their issue, which, is a way to really connect people across perspectives. And then I'll just kind of end with this notion that just the process of creating a guide is incredibly useful for a community, right? You bring people together from different perspectives with the goal of, how do we help people understand this issue better? How can we research this in a way to co-create a document that helps people have a better conversation? That process itself is incredibly valuable. I have a class that I teach, used to be a debate class. Now the job of the class, six groups of four students each, are to create a discussion guide. It's an incredible useful exercise. Instead of activating them as activists to try to pick the right solution, their job is to research multiple perspectives to lay out those options. So the process of doing this itself, even if you never get a chance to run it in the community, is something that really helps us see issues through a very different lens that brings out the best of human nature and helps us, as much as possible, move the needle in building capacity to better address our shared problems. Got some other slides I might kind of pop in later, but I think that's the main part to kind of get us going in a sense of my broader argument. I use lots of different discussion guides. NIF again is my base model that we train on, and a significant percentage of our processes. That's the model we use. It works really well. Of like, hey, what should we do about X to bring us together in a productive way to think about working together on our issues, which is what we need to frame issues to get the best out of us.
Thank you so much, Martine. That really lays such a great foundation for us moving forward as we get into more of the nuts and bolts and how to frame for deliberation. And Brooke, thank you for your excellent question. We will be talking a lot about co-creating the process of co-creating the discussion guides, not only in our strategies for creating deliberative frameworks, but also in the example that will be shared towards the end of our conversation. So I'm excited to build on that question. Thank you for asking that. And in an initial answer to that question, Kenny, will you go to the next slide, please? A lot of or one more slide after. A lot of thinking about deliberative framing can sound overwhelming if you're thinking about how do I do this? Well, the good news is you shouldn't do it alone. There is no one right way to approach framing a public issue, but if there was a wrong way, it would be trying to do it all by yourself. So the process definitely begins by engaging others. And so when you're thinking about wanting to frame an issue for deliberation, you want to begin pulling together an initial team of people. So ask yourself, who else cares about this issue in my community? Um, and think through who might be interested in creating a way for people with different points of view to talk together. The team members don't necessarily have to represent every single point of view in the community, although they should be dedicated to finding and fairly representing the views of others in the community. And then once you have a team of people who are interested in the issue and framing the issue together, they can work with you to develop an outreach process for hearing from a wide range of community members with different perspectives and experiences. And Betty, in just a minute, will share some of the types of questions that you ask to hear folks' perspectives and experiences and begin gathering and collecting those for your framing. And then the team will make a particular effort to discover the views, challenges, and the obstacles faced by those most affected by the issue at hand. So this is not something you have to do alone. Do not fear that. This is definitely something to be done with a team of people. Um, but now I would like to turn and introduce my good friend and colleague, Betty Knighton. She's the former executive director of the West Virginia Center for Civic Life and the former president of the National Issues Forums Institute and a longtime leader in the deliberative democracy field. Betty, I'd love for you to take it away and build on not only how we don't do this alone, but then how we can actually do this work with other people in our communities.
Oh, thank you for that, Kristen, and thank you so much, Martine, for reminding me all the concepts that you've had that you shared with us over the years that have enriched how all of us approach issue framing. The first thing I want to say is that while I am going to walk through some steps, some practical elements along the trajectory of creating a discussion guide, it's always a flexible and fluid process. And so it's kind of a recursive thing. You might do this and realize you need to do more of that. So you're going back and forth. But I find that the most useful way to introduce this is you actually have done this in your own life, in your own mind, for a problem that you faced in your life, in your family, at your workplace. You've probably had a problem that's a common problem to others, you and others, but there are different ways that even you can think of that might be helpful in approaching that or in addressing that problem. So you do kind of an informal framing in your own mind or in your own family or group of friends whenever you're trying to make a decision about what to do when there are multiple perspectives about what might be the best approach. So you just kind of build on that and then think about this in terms of extrapolating it out to your campus, to your community. Here in my state of West Virginia, we've done these framings on a statewide basis. It might be a region, or it could be, as some of us have worked on, the national frameworks as well. So the first, I put in quotation marks, frameable. It's not a word we use every day in our common language, but in this case, we're talking about issues that lend themselves to to supporting this deliberative process. So the things that you might want to look for when you and others that you've pulled together into your team are trying to select an issue that would be frameable for your community. Maybe it'll be very obvious right off the bat, but you want to at least use this checklist. Is it a broad concern within the community that's going to be deliberating about it? And again, you can use community to mean campus, neighborhood, city, state, region, whatever is the parameter for what you're working on. Does it need more than a yes or no answer? Martine's already mentioned that. Not that there's a clear right answer. You want things that people really are struggling with trying to decide what is the right way or ways to go. That you need some new approaches to help move the issue forward, some freshness of ideas that people can talk about. And that their decision making needs to be informed by public judgment, so that it really would be helpful for citizens, community members, residents to weigh in on what needs to happen and maybe be a part of making that happen as well. These are some qualities that are unlikely to encourage deliberation. Some issues are highly technical. And in general, there may be a problem in your community because of the way the traffic is running, and it may have something to do with the way the stoplights are placed. That's a technical issue, and it needs to be addressed. But probably there's civil engineers or others that may need to weigh in on that. So technical issues are usually not right for deliberation unless they're part of another broader issue that the community can weigh in on. Not a yes or no one, has already been decided and needs a rubber stamp. That is like one of the main ones. I think that there has been some suspicion around public meetings in the past, public discussions, when it turns out that people have been gathered to talk about whether or not that school should be closed or that approach should be taken to something, only to find out that the decision was practically already made, if not actually already made. And they're there to kind of rubber stamp it. And there's nothing that's going to break down public trust in this kind of a process and something like that. So would make sure you choose an issue where there is time for people to be deliberative about it, which fills in to the last bullet there, which is if it's something that requires an immediate response, like if people need to know, next Tuesday, you don't really have time to go through this whole process. So there may be ways to address it in other capacities, but in this particular capacity, not so much. Okay, the next slide, please. So one of the first things you do is you gather information and you gather insights. And how do you do that? It can be a very informal process and it could have some formal components to it as well. So if you're working on an issue in your community, whatever the issue is, there's probably some known information that you can get. There's a lot of unknown information. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from the people that are living in your community. You might not know what the range of perspectives would be. And so we sometimes call this an interview. It could be an informal conversation. It could be a small group conversation. But you really want to reach out. You and your other team members will find ways to reach out to as a wider range of people as possible and ask them questions like, what concerns you about this issue? How does it affect you? Or how does it affect other people you know? Maybe it's not directly impacting on your life, but other people that you care about or know of are being impacted. What views have you heard from people who disagree with you? And they can explain to you why, maybe they have a dispute within their own family or their own group, and they can say, well, this is what I've heard somebody else say. What could be done about it, and by whom? And a lot of times you'll get really good ideas for other parts of your framework because they're really suggesting action ideas here. And part of your framework that we'll talk about in a few minutes is the action framework part of it. And then what do you think makes this issue so difficult? So what are we really struggling with? If you talk to a lot of people and you hear that from several different people, you're bound to begin to hear some common threads. There will be some areas that seem similarly motivated when people are talking about this. And there will be areas that seem quite different. And that's what's really going to give you the grist for the framework that you're going to develop. Of course, you also want to review any available information, studies, data. If it's at your city level, there's sources in your own city to find out what is the issue related to policing that is being studied in your community. What is the issue related to people that are struggling to support their families and income levels and related to the economy. I mean, there'll be data available, there'll be reports, there'll be things that you can find out, there'll be organizational people you can talk to. And then in many cases, people really want the results of this framework that supports deliberation to help people decide what they want to do. But some of the things will probably be related to what policymakers should do. So if you want policymakers to listen to what comes out of the discussions that are generated by this framework, involving them early on is also a good idea, not so they can tell you what needs to be done, but to ask them, what are you struggling with as a policymaker? What different perspectives do you have in your own mind so that you can engage them as human beings as well as policymakers? Okay, the next one, please. Okay, so once you've talked to a lot of people, and some people will say, how many is too many? And I would say there is no too many. Because even if you're hearing that similar things from different people, it's okay to keep talking to people because every person that you talk to has now been included in this process. They now are aware that this is getting ready to happen, and they now are more likely, perhaps in the future, to participate in the discussions that this framework is going to generate. So there really isn't a too many. So you'll have all these concerns. You'll put them on a list. It'll be a long, long list, most likely. But then you're looking at them. What is the underlying motivation that causes somebody to have this concern? Are they worried about their own security? Are they worried about the future of their children? Are they worried about whatever their concerns happen to be? Are they worried about law and order being enforced? What is it that is in their minds? And that is not an exact science. There is definitely not one right or wrong way. You could spend a long time trying to assume what the underlying motivation is for somebody's concern. And you could spend a lot of time thinking, oh no, this goes in this approach, and somebody else would say, no, I see it over here in this approach. I think do your best. Just do your best with that. Get it in there. People will have a chance to talk about it because you won't be able to read their minds and know exactly what the motivations are. But some of this will be quite obvious as you look at these clusters. So then once you have that, you kind of cluster the concerns together into whatever seems to be the kind of overarching group of concerns. And it's usually there's three or four. That's typically what's manageable. I think a lot of the National Issues Forums guides have had three, sometimes four. And there's no exact reason why it has to be that. It's like you wouldn't, make the earthquake if you did five, but it's just a lot to manage. So if you can cluster them in a way, not leaving things out, but cluster them in a way that you can get three or four different approaches, people can tend to handle that in deliberative discussions more than when the more you get, the more diffuse they each become. And then you wouldn't want to you want to create a statement that describes what each one of those clusters is really about, just a sentence or two in that way. Okay, the next one, please. Okay. Now so you have, let's say, okay, so now you've identified the issue, you've talked to a lot of people, you've done some research, you've clustered them into, let's say, three different approaches. And within those approaches, that's where you get to work and you say, okay, what would be some of the pros that we heard from people or that you've read or researched about in going this direction? What would be some of the cons? What might be a trade-off? In other words, it would be a hard thing it would be something somebody's willing to do, but only if they were willing to give up that. And that's the way life is sometimes. You have to say, I'm willing to do that if it means trading off this other thing that is also important to me. So you're looking for that. And then what are some of the potential actions? So in that set of questions that I showed you earlier, one of the questions was what might be done and who might do it? So that's where you're getting some of your action ideas, but of course your research and your own thinking will encourage you to come up with some others as well. It's important that you include in your discussion guide a range of actions. So you wouldn't want your approach to be the government should do this and the government should do that and then they should do this and then they should do that, because there's hardly any real common public problem that we're facing that is going to be solved directly by the government or directly by individuals or directly by schools. It's going to be a wide spectrum of actions that occur. So you want to make sure that you hear about those actions and you include actions that could come from individuals, groups of people, volunteers, organizations, policymakers, faith groups, the whole gamut of what makes up a community. Okay, the next one. And then you want to test your framework. Even though you and your team you've talked to a lot of people, you've done all these things, you still don't know if you have made it clear enough, if you've made it comprehensive enough. Has anything accidentally been left out? So before you really start using your framework in more public settings, you want to test it. So you could pull together groups of people. You could go to where people already are. Usually you have multiple test forums to make sure that what you're doing, it resonates with people, that the language that you put in there is clear, that people understand what each approach is about, and then you could have a chance to revise it to make it even better after these tests. Okay. And then I'll just give you a couple of examples before we can open this up to conversation. This is an example of a National Issues Forum guide that was created a few years ago on safety and justice. And the question was, how should communities reduce violence? One approach, and these are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they do represent different concerns and different ways of looking at the issue. One approach was we really need to enforce the law together. We have to expand policing while we develop partnerships with police in order to have better law enforcement in our community. That's the way that we reduce violence in our community. Another approach is, well, there are a lot of injustices in the law. There are inequities. There's not as much accountability as there needs to be with law enforcement. So what we really need to do is make sure that we apply the law fairly. And then another approach would be, well, if we didn't address the actual root causes of violence and disrupt conflict, then we're missing the boat here. What we really need to do is to prevent violence and de-escalate it when it begins. So you can see that's an example of three different approaches that are not exactly mutually exclusive, and some people might feel that a part of each of those is valuable and worthy of consideration. Um, And then then we'll go to the next frame after this is an example of just a statewide one that we did here in West Virginia, and it was about having the best start in life for children. So we called it making the most of the first 3 years. And here, a different issue entirely, but at the same general idea. You can see one approach is that we really want to encourage caring and capable parenting. So that's parent education, all kinds of high quality programs that prepare people for parenthood and support them. Other approach has to do with creating family-friendly communities where people can be supported by social networks within places of worship, within policies that make workplace practices amenable to families. And then another one is to make sure that equal opportunity is built upon so that you have a more level playing field for addressing some of the social and economic barriers that parents face as they struggle to become good parents. So those are just two examples of frameworks. The next slide will give you a very quick recap. You do your public research, which includes what you can read, what you can learn, and what you can find out from talking to people. You create the framework, you draft it, you test it, you revise it, you make it as strong as you can be. You actually turn that into a written document, a written guide that you can use in your various settings. And then you can often prepare for the forums by creating some kind of a moderator guide or a questionnaire that goes along with your guide so that people can collect information. So now I'll turn it back over to you, Kristen, to involve the others.
Thank you so much, Betty. I really appreciate the overview of the various steps for framing issues for deliberation. I'd like to welcome Herman Lehman from Keys to the City Community Coaching. Next slide, please. And Shantina Whittle, Program and Outreach Coordinator for the David Matthews Center for Civic Life. We thought it would be helpful to ask two of our friends and partners who have recently framed an issue related to housing in Central Alabama to share their experiences about what it looked like to co-create that deliberative discussion guide alongside community members. And so we'll take down the slides so that you can better see Herman and Shantina. And Herman and Shantina, would you briefly introduce yourself and then take it away? We'd love to hear more about the how you all created the issue guide for your community and how it was received by community members. I'd also like to ask folks, please go ahead and share your questions in the chat for Martine and Betty, but also for Herman and Shantina as they speak as well. So Herman and Shantina, welcome and take it away.
I'll just jump in there first. I'm Herman Lehman. I'm from Montevallo, Alabama. I'm formerly a city clerk and treasurer for our city, and now do consulting work, a lot of which includes working with communities and doing deliberative dialogue. So, Shantina.
Hi, y'all. Sorry, I'm getting over a really bad sinus infection. So if I sound horrible, I apologize. Um, I am Shantina Whittle. I work for the David Matthews Center located in Montevallo, Alabama, on the campus of the American Village. I formerly was the Civic Fellow for the David Matthews Center and have now been promoted to working in the Program and Outreach Coordinator position. A little bit about just a quick spiel about the David Matthews Center. We're celebrating 20 years of helping Alabamians build and sustain good habits of citizenship. And we do that through civic education and deliberative dialogue.
I guess what we're supposed to do, Krista, you jump in if I get off track or whatever, but we're supposed to sort of talk about a real world example of how we use deliberative dialogue and how we named and framed an issue. And one of the most recent things that are still ongoing is a housing initiative that we've been working on in conjunction with Shantina and the folks at the Matthews Center. This started about a year ago when a small group of people, about 5 to 8 people at my wife's church, got together and started talking about how they could um, address the issue of affordable housing, very broad issue. They've got about 10 acres of land adjacent to their church that they had talked about in previous years, doing something with, maybe developing some housing on that land or doing something. And they felt like maybe now was the time to bring that back up again and start talking about it. And my wife, who was on that committee, um, voluntold me to be a part of it because of my previous experience as a city clerk. that I knew about zoning, and I knew about, the processes that you go through to get things approved and all that. So they brought me into the conversation, and the first thing that I did was tell them that I didn't think that a small group of people, even within the church itself, should be dictating what's done with their land, or could determine on their own what the needs really were for their church or for their community, and that they needed to open this thing up and to make it a larger conversation. That it wasn't something that they needed to try to decide that day, that they needed to spend time doing it. And when I talked about time, it's been going on for about a year. So it's a lot of time. And so we started out that group of five. We kind of morphed into a steering committee for the process of about 12 to 15 folks. And those were the folks that sort of helped us convene the conversations going forward. And they were also the ones that helped us put together the issue guide. And we started out with conversations with sort of a guiding question of how can we ensure that housing in the Tri-County area remains affordable, available, and accessible for all residents, including those in vulnerable situations. And that was sort of just, very succinctly, but that was sort of how we started the conversations. We got together, I guess, Shantina, was it two different groups of about 20 or so people that were involved in the sort of that industry of housing and housing related type services, to talk about things and to sort of answer those questions, to, as Betty was talking about, sort of fill out the guide, what really narrow down what the issues were. You want to talk about that, about how we did that or anything?
Um, I think you covered, I think you covered it pretty good. The David Matthews Center, was involved with hosting, kind of convening people, from different areas and organizations around Montevallo that were already doing and talking about the work of housing, during those two initial stakeholder conversations, which were
And
great.
so we kind of narrowed things down to four approaches, which seem to be coming up more and more. One was, how do we expand affordable housing options? The other was, how do we remove barriers to home ownership? And then how do we increase the housing supply through policy reforms? And then the final one was, how do we address housing needs for our most vulnerable populations? So as you can see, it's really, really broad. But that was sort of our starting point. And when we created the issue guide, and this is where, I've had a lot of background for about 10 years in doing this, but I mean, if you can steal it, do it. I mean, it's just the NAF has all kinds of great resources that you can adapt. There are other groups out there. The Matthews Center has resources you can adapt. You can use verbatim something that somebody's put together already, or you can adopt it to your situation and make it your own, or you can create it from scratch, which is kind of what we did, sort of. I mean, it's not that I didn't steal some of it, but we and the other thing that you can do is utilize things like Chat GPT. I mean, I hate to mention those sorts of things, but there are resources out there that you can use, especially if you've got some background in this, that you can help guide the discussion. And then you put together a draft and you take it back to the steering committee and say, okay, given everything that we've been hearing, does this make sense? And then, as Betty said, you go out and you test it, and so, yep, that's it, that'll work. And then what we did was we took it to greater conversations within the community. We actually used the guide that we developed to go out and get feedback from just everyday, people, the people that weren't necessarily experts in the field, but who were impacted by these issues. And we put together, I guess, three different meetings, Shantina, isn't that right? In different locations. We did it in is a tri-county initiative, so we tried to have an issue a meet at least one meeting in every one of the counties that we represented. We had trouble getting one of the counties to participate, but we were in just two of them, and we had like three different meetings, and probably, I don't know, how many people do you think we had total that were involved?
Oh, I can't think of the number on top of my head, but each group was around 20
Yeah,
to.
so it's at least 60 additional people that were involved, in addition to our initial conversations. So we got a lot of feedback, and we were able to sort of pull that all together and put it into some sort of an action plan for moving forward. And I think that's the biggest thing that when I think about this and I use the plans and the name and frame and is to not get bogged down in the process itself, or even with the conversations that you have. Don't get so tied up that you're asking exactly the right questions or whatever. I mean, you want to elicit conversation and elicit ideas, things that you've never thought about, and you record those things, and those go into the plan, and they go into the actions moving forward, because this isn't just about talking, it's about moving towards action. And that's the hardest part of all, really. But when you go through this long process and you involve all these people, it makes it easier for you to find out what resources are in the community already, who's out there that can help. And then when you go to a decision maker, like somebody on your council or a county government, and you ask them for their support, which is usually money, they're more likely to give it, because you've laid the groundwork for that, and you've involved people in the community, and you've tied it into all these things. So anyway, that's kind of my take on it. Shantine, do you have anything else that you want to throw into it?
I do want to add about the last meeting, the big reveal, as we called it, was a great success because people that had been a part of the entire process, from the framing all the way to some of the testing that we did in the community, they were involved in seeing the final report of all of their responses, all of their resources that had given throughout the months. They got to see it all in one big, great presentation at the end, to kind of see the progress of what they were talking about for all of those months. It moved it from just talking to a different area of deciding. Also during that meeting, um, um, they were able to create subcommittees, and to pick a decision, or pick a approach to one of the issues that they were talking about, and choose and decide with people in the room what is the next step of action for them in that group. So I thought that was very, it was almost different than I personally have seen, and I thought that it was a great movement of the talk to decisions.
Yeah, and our steering committee gets back together again next week to sort of start mapping out where we go next. So it hadn't stopped. So the discussion was just sort of the first part, and creating that discussion guide. The issue guide was an important part of the whole process, but it's not the be all and end all of the process. It's what actions come from that are really important. So Kristen, anything?
Herman and Shantina, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your examples and experiences. I would like now, if it's okay, Kenny, will you spotlight Betty and Martine as well, in addition to Herman and Shantina? And we'd love to take some questions. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. I'll uplift some of those. And then if you want to add additional questions, feel free to drop those in the chat, or to raise your hand if you'd like to ask your question verbally. Um, and I also think that Herman and Shantina provided a great teaser for our next workshop on December 4th, where we will talk more about what it looks like to move from the deliberation into forming those action groups and driving the action forward, going from talk to action. So thank you all so much. All right, Lori, we would love to take your question first. Thank you. You can feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm grappling with the fact we have something in motion that's gathering data. It's through focus groups, interviews, surveys, et cetera. We may not have framed those questions exactly right in terms of what are your concerns, like some of the questions Betty had. There's some of that in there. But now I'm trying to think of how to use this opportunity of the next piece, which is bringing together people. We thought we'd bring people in a second phase to look at first phase data together, make sense of it, and try to come with a better framing of some policy options around violence reduction, but the element within that being how to deal with justice issues here in Haiti. There's, because our thesis is that not having a clear path to justice is keeping violent actors violent and is not seeing an exit. So it's trying to build more consensus around a thorny issue, but I'm wondering whether we were seeing stakeholders as kind of the framing team in a sense, but I'm wondering if the dialogue facilitators are the framing team and we need to come into that second phase already with a draft of data from the first round of asking people what they think, their opinions about things, so that then we can go further with the group. Sorry, I don't know if that's too hard to grasp where we are in the stream, but that's the question.
Thanks, Lori. Betty or Martine, would one of y'all like to answer that or share some thoughts?
Go ahead, Beck.
Well, Laura, you're really focusing on when to bring the public in to look at the data together, or to bring the team together to examine the data.
Well, I was just wondering whether before going from the first phase, it's all been public stakeholders from different sectors in the first phase. And we were thinking to bring a subset of them back in the second phase to look at all the results we got from the first phase and to boil it down more. And we thought they'd be naming and framing, coming up with approaches that we could then discuss with others. But I'm wondering whether there needs to be an interim step in there after you do those initial conversations that you talked about. Is it then that the team that you have is going to be doing an initial draft of name and frame that then gets improved in the room like Martin was talking about? Or is it that stakeholders themselves are going to be involved in that first draft, that then gets improved?
So there's the framing team, and then there's the stakeholders that are most affected by or working on the issue. Is that the differentiation there?
Yeah, or are those one and the same a bit?
Well, they could be one and the same, but the key criteria, I think, for being on the framing team is that you really believe in reaching out to the public, hearing their points of view, making sure you get a lot of diverse points of view in the room, talk to the people that are most affected. That you believe in that process. So you may not be the people that are the most involved in that work every day. You just may really believe that this is an important process. I do think it would be helpful to take it to people that were not the original stakeholders, but for the framing team to take it out to people and to ask them if there's anything else that doesn't seem to be in there. Because even people that are in organizations that work on an issue all the time there might be some points of view out there that they're not hearing. So I do think that extra step would be a really healthy thing to do. It's like you'd have even more data then, you'd even have more input, and that could just only enrich it, I think.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Lori, and thank you for that response, Betty.
Can I just
Brooke has. Oh, go ahead, Martine.
on that? Yeah, I mean, and sometimes, I mean, it's always it's a cycle process, right? That you're, each time you're able to engage, more voices or test out the framework or get people in a more informal way to react to it, it's going to kind of improve it some because again, you're never going to have it perfect, right? So you're always kind of working to get it better and better. So gathering a group of people together to react to it as a framework, whether they're actually working through it, like doing it in a forum or just something less. The questions I always ask is, hey, what do you like here? What do you don't like here? What do you want to push back on? And what's missing, right? And those conversations themselves are kind of great. And as Betty was saying, the more people you engage and take their perspective seriously, the more support the project's going to have overall, and obviously the better the document itself will be.
Yeah, I would just add the one thing is it's not an academic pursuit. It's the goal is to get to some sort of action that addresses the issue that you're concerned about. So if you spend all your time worrying about the process, you're gonna lose, the effectiveness of the product or however you want to put it. So sometimes you just got to jump in and just do it. And so that's, even if it's not perfect, just do it and try it. And then, like Martine said and Betty said, you can adjust things later, but the goal is to get to some action, and that's what it's really all about.
And Herman, that's a perfect segue to a question from from the chat, Brooke asked about timeline. Coming from a local government perspective, it's often the case that issues or projects don't have a lot of time to stand up deeper conversations. And so, can you all speak a little bit about the time frame for creating a deliberative framework? And then what do you do when you don't have a lot of time, but people really do need to deliberate about the issue?
I can just jump in real quick if that's okay, because I come from this from a local government perspective. I was a city clerk, and we had an issue that came before us about a non-discrimination ordinance that was presented. And the council could have voted that night and approved it right then and there, and then it would have been done. But we saw, because of our work with deliberative dialogue, we saw a benefit to go that route. And what could have been decided that evening took us a year and a half to get to the end of. And it was a long, drawn out process. And I'm not sure that anybody was really happy at the end of it, because it actually changed what it was that was presented initially, but not really the character of what was presented initially. So the character was still there, but all the details had changed. But so it can take a lot of time. And like I said, we've been doing this housing thing for over a year now. It takes time. And that's not usually the way governments think about things. They think about a public hearing of come in and scream at me for 3 minutes at a time, and then we're going to make a decision. And that's not, it takes a total change in mindset to go this route, when you're dealing with local government.
Martine, I want to hear your answer, and then Herman, I do want to circle back of why you all found the time investment to be beneficial. Go ahead, Martine.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with a lot of that. One of the things in the link on my resource page, I've been doing a lot of work making distinctions between dialogue, deliberation, and debate as these three different things, and they all have upside and downside. And I'm biased. I run the Center for Public Deliberation. I think deliberation is the best one. But the downside of deliberation is it's by far the most resource heavy in terms of time, in terms of, you need small group facilitators and all these different kind of things. So yeah, I think often it does take a long time. I talk about my work often of like making sense of the noise, right? So we have all these public processes, whether that's surveys or one at a time on the microphone or public hearings or emails, that we can get a whole bunch of opinion. To make sense of that opinion, to try to kind of bring together facts and try to get a baseline of information, and then create a discussion guide that takes a while, right? That being said, I'll go back to the quick comment on AI. And overall, I'm very an AI skeptic and not too sure. But we were running an open house a couple years ago for a democracy summit. Right before the open house, the whole issue of whether university presidents should take positions on controversial issues, particularly tied to kind of Israel and Gaza, kind of exploded. So I got on, I think I used Microsoft Copilot, and I said, what are all the different perspectives on whether university presidents should make statements? It gave me a list of 10 pretty good arguments. I tweaked it, spent some time, but we created a one-page handout. It wasn't quite an IF guide. It was more what I call a viewpoint document. It had about eight or so kind of two-sentence perspectives on something. And then we used that, and that sparked a much better conversation because instead of just relying on what people say, it gave them something to work on together, right? And it, so that literally took me 15 minutes to create something that still sparked a much better conversation than just, hey, what do y'all think about this, right? So it kind of runs the gamut. I'll also say, and my page has some links to this. For the CBD, we don't tend to create the 30-page NIF style discussion guides. We're basically just creating what I call a placemat, often 11 by 17 page, completely the framework. What should we do about X? Has three approaches, has a list of actions, has a list of supporting arguments for each, has a list of trade-offs for each. But we're actually creating a one-page document, or sometimes a four-page. We might have like an introduction page and then one page for each approach that we're using in our events. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of what are you creating based on your resources and your time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martine. And go ahead, Betty.
I was going to add a quick comment about timeline and also because I also see in Kristen's question here about students being involved in this. Two quick examples. There's a group of students this is in Eastern Kentucky, and their teacher, this was a group of, I think, 9th through 12th graders. They wanted to talk about what can it take to improve this community. They were struggling financially in that community, and there was a lot of issues that they wanted to address. So the students took cameras out, and they took pictures all over town in terms of things that concern them about their community and what they might build on. They took the photos and kind of clustered them together as a way to start the kind of motivations that were behind what concerned people. They ended up creating a brief discussion guide. I think they did all that in a period of a few weeks, and it was narrated by the students, and it was also framed with the pictures that they took in their community as examples of some of the problems that they saw. And then another teacher in an art class here in West Virginia had her students draw what they were hearing from people that they had talked to in their community or their own family, their neighborhood, and then they created a discussion guide based around their artwork with language that described it as well. So there's a lot of innovative ways that people that can approach this, and some of them are less time consuming than others.
Thank you. I think we could talk a lot longer. I realize we're at the top of the hour and very much appreciate everyone for sharing their perspectives and great questions. We will please put them in the chat, and we will follow up with those with answers as we are able and have time. I'd like to pull up the QR code and the link for our survey. We'd love to have your feedback to help improve future sessions. And then I really want to end by thanking Martine Carkison, Betty Knighton, Herman Lehman, and Shantina Whittle for sharing their insights and expertise with us today. It was an absolute honor hearing from each of you. I also would like to thank Patty Deneen, Kenny McGuan, and Don Harfman for their work behind the scenes to make today's webinar a success. And finally, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure learning alongside you. We hope you'll make plans to join us for the final workshop in this series. It's called ACT, an Introduction to Deliberative Talk to Action Initiatives, and that will be on December 4th. Stay connected with us at nifi.org, or you can reach me at cbronner@nifi.org. Thank you so much for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.